the Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burt
and Stephen Molyneux.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast. We're back at racing in the UK and we're looking forward to our first race of the season. I'm joined this morning by our British handicapper and also now our UAE handicapper, Stephen Molyneux. Good morning, Stephen.
Hi there, Debbie. How are you?
Yes, all good here. How's things in Dubai?
Good. Yeah, all very good. Thank you. Just obviously the season finished about 6 weeks ago. Feels like about 6 months, but gives us time to reflect and obviously look forward to the UK season now.
Yeah, superb. Right. Well, obviously we've got a bit of a Middle Eastern flavour with our first race because it's the Wathba Stallions Cup Handicap Stakes, which is a 0 to 70 handicap run just over a mile at Royal Windsor Racecourse this coming Monday. And we're recording this before declarations have come out, but I've had a bit of a steer from some of the trainers on what jockeys they might like to have booked. Obviously, again, the situation in the UK sometimes, obviously the thoroughbreds often take precedence over jockey bookings for us. So it may be that the jockeys that they've hoped would be booked end up being called off somewhere else. But anyway, we've got a few ideas on who might be riding what. What did you think of the race as it stands at the moment, Stephen?
I think it's a very competitive start to the season, and any jockey that is riding at Windsor should want to ride in it. You know, it's a very good prize money. 6 runners, as you say, and I think on paper it looks very, very difficult to sort of pin down what you describe as being a warm favourite. So in that respect, you'd give all 6 some sort of chance. Obviously, they're going to be at various stages of fitness, you'd imagine. If previous histories to go on, then obviously James Owen tends to have his stable that bit further forward than maybe 1 or 2 others. But no, it's a nice mix. Obviously, a couple in there that get to run off their mark of 72, which is obviously a couple of pounds higher than the handicap bridge, but that was brought in by the BHA a couple of years ago and replicated by ARO. So that's led to a good competitive start to the season, I think.
Okay, and if we look at the top horse at the moment, Jahez, it's possible he may end up being ridden by an amateur. When I went to see James Owen a couple of weeks ago at his racing club open morning, he did say that, as in previous years, he's hoping to use some of the stable amateurs and give them a chance. And Jahez is certainly a horse that has gone well for amateurs in the past. He actually, the only race he won in the UK at any rate was he was ridden by one of the stable amateurs on that occasion. And you suspect he might be a horse which probably does best if he's not given too much instruction by the jockey, shall we say. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I think there was one occasion last year, wasn't there, at Doncaster, where he seemed to be enjoying himself out in front, should we say, and obviously went a little bit too hard on that occasion and maybe found the distance stretching him as well. But he's a horse that's become well handicapped now. Obviously, he ran up to 80 on the back of that Wolverhampton victory to which you refer. That was in novice company. He's yet to win a handicap, but he has finished second off that mark at Wolverhampton in a stronger grade of race than this. I suppose last year you could say was a bit of a struggle for him. He never really got to within 5 or 6 lengths of winning a race. But this 0 to 70 does represent a drop in grade for him. He looks a fairly uncomplicated sort. And yeah, tactically, you'd imagine he could go off in front. Watching a few recent meetings at Windsor, and obviously the ground conditions have been fairly firm in recent weeks, not too much rain, and if that continues, then front running on the rail could well be the way to go, as it often is at Windsor. So Jahez would have a chance in that respect. James Owen always gives his stable staff / stable amateurs a chance in this sort of race, so I'm sure Jahez will give whoever's on board a good ride.
And that's quite an important point, actually, about the going. The going given on the BHA website as of this morning was good to firm, good in places. However, there is a note of caution here because although they put a bit of water on during the week, there's a chance of rain overnight into Sunday morning and on Sunday night into Monday morning. So it could, we could, having declared we could be racing into slightly uncharted territory. And certainly with some of these horses, not all of them have had a chance to run on properly soft ground. Jahez, obviously, when he raced in France, He was third over a mile for Francois Rowe. That was in a ladies' race, one of the Sheikha Fatima invitationals. So again, obviously in that sort of race, the quality of riding can be a little bit patchy in some cases. But certainly he's one who most of certainly he won when he won in Dungeet in Holland. That was on good to firm, and a lot of his better turf form has been on quicker ground. So that may come into play.
Yeah, it might. I mean, there's always the concern of rain on top of watered ground that can send it even wetter quicker, if you know what I mean. But hopefully the weather stays fair, and it's always best to see good Arabian racing on firmish ground. But yeah, looking through his profile, you'd imagine that he'd want it to stay on the quick side, and that would lend itself to a more of a tactical advantage as well, should he go forward.
And then next on the list, we've got what for the UK at any rate is a newcomer, Rebel Athbar. I believe he's going to be partnered by Tom Marquand, who's obviously had quite a few successes now in the Athbar colours. Obviously, most notably last year winning the Group 3 Sheikha Fatima Bint Mubarak Cup on Bayan Athbar. He's quite interesting. So he, I don't know whether, obviously you've probably seen the race in order to give him his rating, but he was very green despite making all. And the horse that very nearly beat him looked to be a good hand or so bigger than him.
Yeah, it was very notable, wasn't it? How bigger and taller the second horse was, and how much better he travelled through the race than Rebel Athbar. But I think this horse is symptomatic of the way that Phil Collington brings his horses along, in that they're never fully tuned up first time out, and if they can win first time, then it's always a boost to their chances going forward. I didn't think it was much of a race. Obviously, very difficult to tell in Belgium with handicap marks and the lack of them, etc. It was a 3-year-old only race, and the field got fairly well strung out from a very early stage, and you're sort of going on instinct more than anything else. You can sort of tell by the gait of a horse and how they go through a race as to how much ability they have. And I sort of took the view that those in behind that day, maybe weren't world beaters. That's not to say that Rebel Athbar isn't going to go on and prove himself to be a useful sort this year. The pair were well clear of the rest, and they were much better than the rest from a very early stage in that race. And like you say, for him to have won, despite the greenness that he showed, he was on and off the bridle. The second travelled much better. He was headed. He was probably a good half a length down, a furlong out, wasn't he? And Rebel Athbar did battle back, to his credit. And you'd feel he was, if that pair were to meet again, then he'd be a good deal better than the runner-up. The greenness issue going into a handicap now kind of remains for me. He sort of doesn't feel as though he's going to have learnt a massive, or he certainly will have learnt a massive amount, but is it going to be enough to see him win against these hardened handicappers? I still feel he's going to be green, because he was so green in that race, is the way I'm going. But he's travelled, he's been over to Belgium. That would have helped him as well. He was due to have another run, apparently, according to Phil, but unfortunately suffered a bit of an injury. But that would have given him time to grow up. And I think what Phil Collington does very well, and particularly with these Athbar horses, we've seen plenty of them come over to Dubai. He does give them plenty of time. He does leave a lot to work on for the next time, and that will come to fruition at some point this season. My just one nagging doubt would be where the first time is going to be a good time to catch him in what could be a competitive handicap up against horses that have got plenty of experience, whereas he doesn't.
Yeah, I quite agree with you there, and I think experience could easily be a telling factor. I mean, obviously, he has the experience of Newmarket, which is a busy training centre, and you get to see a lot of horses and a lot of big, wide open spaces, which obviously is a huge part of the learning curve for young horses. But as you say, I mean, it was good to see him stick his head down and crack on right on the line there. So he's obviously got a little bit about him. And I mean, Phil himself, when I went to see him last month, he did say that one of the, he's very keen to get this horse out, because he's got nothing but maidens to work it with at home, because of course, although he's got Bayan Athbar there, she's had a little bit of a break, and she's on a different training regime to this one, who's been on the go for some time. So I think for Phil's benefit and for his team, obviously this is a bit of a pathfinding mission.
Yeah, and opportunities. Obviously, he's sort of got to take them when they come. And coming to a sort of a mark of 72, it wasn't obviously that easy a decision. Bearing in mind that he did seem to win with more in hand than the official margin. But if you do look through the program book, if he was to be rated any higher than 72, then it would have been the end of June, I think, before he had an opportunity to run at Newbury in a 0 to 75. So, you've got to give these horses a chance. They're not going to progress without having the opportunity to race. So a mark of 72 could well underestimate him, I think, going forward. But my sort of feeling to negate all that is that the lack of experience might catch him out first time in the handicap.
Absolutely. And we've got some horses which have really only had sort of 2 or 3 runs a season, and one of those is G1, who obviously started off Sheikh Hamdan and was also trained by Phil Collington, as it happens, and then obviously he got sold over the winter and joined the Plums and raced in their colours last year. He looks he looked quite a big sort, and probably was going to take a bit more time to come to hand. Yeah,
that's what I thought. He'd be one of those stereotypical later maturing Arabians that could well do well as a 6 or 7 year old. Still only had 7 starts. His form in maidens was good enough to earn him an initial mark of 80, which obviously proved to be a bit too high in one subsequent run for Phil, and then 4 handicaps last year. Although saying that, he wasn't really beaten too far in any of those 4 runs. He was reasonably competitive whilst still looks to be learning. This is the first time he's down into a 0 to 70. The mile trip might be on the sharp side. His form as a novice did come over this sort of distance, but last year he raced mainly over further. And I thought he'd be a 6-year-old that could improve this season.
Apparently Thomas Greatrex has been booked to ride it, who actually gave our next horse in the list, Altar, a cracker of a rider at Chepstow on her first run for James Owen and Blackrock Racing last year. What do we think of Altar, who I believe is going to be ridden by Holly Doyle?
I thought this one was probably the one that they might all have to beat. Her profile's not exactly rock solid. There are a few blobs in there, should we say, but I just felt she was getting her act together on the last couple of starts. One of those was in handicap company at Chepstow, where she was only beaten half a length off a mark of 65. She was then faced with a very difficult task in the UK Derby on a final start, but she did finish 5th, and she did beat quite a few horses who were entitled to finish in front of her based on rating. So it's not inconceivable that she could have gone up from that mark of 67 on the back of that Group 1, but obviously when you're beating 21 and a quarter length, it's perhaps a little unkind to penalise them in the handicap as well. So that's why she's off a current mark of 67. But yeah, the form of her Chepstow win when she was behind Mazuna, I think works out pretty well. Mazuna went on to finish 2nd in a Group 3 before she headed out to Dubai, where her one start saw her run over a trip that was too far for her. So I think that's the best piece of form we've got on show in this race, representing James Owen, who we've already said should have his string fairly well forward. And I thought this was a reasonable opportunity for her to get her head in front.
I agree with you there. And when I went to visit James, his string did look very, very fit and ready to go. So she certainly won't be lacking for fitness. I mean, I suppose the only possible chink in her armour is again possibly the change in the going. She raced on soft at Newbury in the conditions race that I sponsored with the magazine, and was 5th over a mile and a quarter. And also the Derby was on good to soft. What do you think that's an issue?
It's probably a bit too soon to be sort of making a judgment one way or the other. Her best run did come on the leveler of good ground. So I just think more that the types of race that she's running either side of that have been possibly against her more than anything. And I think she just ended the season on the up for me. So I wouldn't be sort of passing judgment on her ground requirements just yet, I don't think.
Sure. And she's by Mahab, who got Manak, who ran in this country and won the juvenile 7 furlong race, and then was a bit of a surprise winner of a Cahaler Classic. Nobody thought he'd get that 1.25 miles. And certainly, you know, he's proved that horses can go that far with Deran, who won the last year's Cahaler Classic. Do you think that maybe this is the perfect trip for her over a mile?
Again, on evidence so far that the stiff mile at Chepstow suited her pretty well. It's opportunities, isn't it, and where you can run. She's run over as far as 1.5 miles and didn't really show her form, but that would have been a bit of a test at Doncaster that day. So yeah, as things stand, a mile should be right up her street, you'd imagine, with that potential fitness edge as well.
And then one horse who's already proven over the mile trip, albeit that it's on the all weather, is Zane's Hyperion. He's been a really good, solid, honest horse. My concern with him, I think, more than anything else, is that the mark he's on is about where he is, and I don't know whether there's going to be much more to come from him. Obviously, it's a horse that you're familiar with rating. What do you think?
He's obviously got to step up again now, hasn't he? As he's gone up in grade. I mean, he's entitled to have gone up in grade, having won those 2 races at Lingfield and Wolverhampton last year. The thing with him is his best runs, or the start of his good run of form, in each of his last 2 seasons has come on his 3rd start. In his 2nd season of racing, his first 2 starts, he was well beaten, albeit one of those was in a maiden. And then he finished placed, I think, on his remaining 3 starts that season. And then last season, he was placed on his first 2 starts, but fairly well beaten. And then he won his next 2. So the sort of thing suggests that he's going to need perhaps his first run or his first couple of runs. And the handicap mark as well. Like you say, he did win those 2 races, went up from 57 on the most recent of those to a mark of 65, where he was well beaten in this type of grade last time at Wolverhampton. He's just edged down a couple of pounds for that. But yeah, he might just struggle at this sort of level. I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt until he had that run or 2 under his belt, because he could just progress again. You know, he seems to be a late maturing horse, as befits one from the Peter Hammersley yard, and I wouldn't be surprised if he could win again this season off a mark in the 60s, but I'd just like to see a run or 2, I think, under his belt before then.
And actually, when I spoke to Pete, when I went to visit, he did say the one thing that he'd been concerned about is soft ground. He probably wouldn't, you know, good and quicker, no problem, probably wouldn't want it too soft. So one horse there, also from Pete, Bin Al-Ree, he's pretty much the ground aside facing similar conditions to the race he won at Bath last year on his reappearance. So, you know, he's clearly a horse that can go well fresh and can run well from the bottom of the handicap as well. But also he's got Marco Gianni booked.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, Marco would be one that could do a lightweight, which Bin Al-Ree will carry 8 stone 5 in this race. And yeah, when I first looked through it, I thought my first conclusion, without going into massive amount of depth, is that Bin Al-Ree needs an easier grade of race, bearing in mind that he won off 47, but that actually was a 0 to 70 last year, as you say, carrying a lightweight up against better horses. So that seems to suit him. That was firm ground at Bath on that occasion. And I wouldn't say he necessarily went off the boil afterwards. He just maybe found his mark too high, and he's now down back on that winning mark of 47. So there does seem to be quite a bit in place for him to run another big race as long as he's ready to go, which he clearly was at Bath last year. So no massive reason to suspect he's not going to be primed for another good run on his reappearance. And
of course, one other very important thing to add into that equation is that he's actually been gelded over the winter. In several of his races last year, he was seen to try and take bites out of the opposition. And apparently he'd done that a few times at home. So he's carrying a little less weight of his own for this season. But having seen him at Pete's, he's lost that sort of stallion crest. He's lost actually quite a lot of weight but not condition. And Pete's quite hopeful that it will have straightened his mind out a bit.
Poor horse, as an 8-year-old, he probably thought he'd get away with that, but he's but no, if that helps him. He has, I mean, in his races, he has sort of shaped as though he's lost a bit of concentration on more than one occasion. The Bath race that he won was obviously the 2 of them came clear, actually finished ahead of Zane's Hyperion on that occasion, and the track more than anything might just have kept him a bit more interested, which of course Windsor will as well, with it being a switchback track. So Yeah, again, going through all six, I genuinely could not rule out any of the six, which is why it's such a good start to the season.
Yeah, I know. And, it certainly looks a competitive race. One thing, as we're talking about jockeys, and obviously we don't have a full confirmed list yet, but a new thing for the season in the UK is that amateurs and apprentices are going to be allowed the same grades of allowances. I don't know whether everyone's picked up on that. So for jockeys that have ridden less than 5 winners, they can claim the £7. From 6 to 10 winners, it's £5, and from 11 to 25 winners, it's £3. I think that may prove to be quite interesting as the season goes on. Those wins, for the apprentices, those wins won't count towards their claim on thoroughbreds, but certainly it's an added interest for arrow trainers, I think.
Yeah, it's a case over here in Dubai that the Arabian wins don't count towards losing their claim, and it will, I'm sure, persuade more trainers to claim off the horses. I do think, strength in the saddle is a key thing with these Arabians, and the fact that you've spoken about Tom Marquand and Holly Doyle potentially riding at Windsor on Monday, can only be very good for the sport. But we are dealing with smaller animals where the benefit of a £7 claim off 10 stone 2, for example, can do nothing but help.
And obviously you're just settling into your new role as UAE handicapper. I understand there's going to be a few changes out there next season.
Yeah, we've undertaken some sort of review into the ratings of the horses over here, having been involved in British Arabian racing for about 8 or 9 years now. I think it is one of the biggest, I won't say one of the biggest, but one of the harder parts of the job is assessing form lines from one jurisdiction to a next, and it's often led to either quite dramatic drops or quite dramatic increases in the case of a horse that's come from Dubai to the UK, and it sort of begged the question, why weren't the rating systems on a level playing field all over the world? And that's what we've done with the UAE horses. We ran a sort of data of all the 470, I think it is, that were registered as active, and there was just a great percentage of horses down in the 30 to 50 bracket, where if they were to be racing in England or France, for example, they'd probably be rated in the 50 to 70 bracket. So we've taken the quite dramatic step of increasing all the ratings on a sliding scale from £25 if a horse was rated 30, all the way up to raising a horse who's rated 99, £1, for example. The reason it's lesser at the top end is because the horses that are rated nearer 100 are actually rated based on form in group races, and the way that those races were rated in the UAE is on a par with the rest of the world. So it's just trying to bring everything into line. We're in a new age now, hopefully back in an age where horses can travel from one country to the next with a degree of ease, and it just brings greater clarity, I think, to trainers, owners, breeders. If they're in the UAE with a horse that's rated 75, they know they can come back to the UK and be rated 75. There shouldn't really be any grey area. So hopefully that's going to lead to one of the main aims is for it to lead to a more cohesive program book in the UAE as well. You can plan races and just give hopefully trainers more opportunities. They've been very receptive of it so far, and hopefully it's not just the racing, it can help them breeding wise as well. A broodmare who they try to market that's been rated 50 really should have been rated 70, 75, and that obviously gives them greater credibility when they're selling their progeny.
And of course, with the dispersal of the Shadwell Arabian stock over the course of the winter, you've seen quite a lot more UK runners test their form in the UAE, and we had an interesting situation with the Meydan horses in training sale at the end of the year, where the top price horse was actually Mumayez, who had won his maiden at Lingfield here last year. Yeah,
and they've largely done very well, the horses that have come over from the UK to the UAE. They made good money, and I think they showed the UAE owners that horses from England, and let's face it, they're not over raced in England, are they? You know, they have a nice nursery, so to speak, a nice introduction to racing. They're still running for good money, and they can arrive in the UAE sort of October, November time, fit and ready to go, ready to hit the ground running. So be interesting to see if one or two have taken note for future reference that, you know, 1 or 2 starts in the UK and then, you know, you are ready to go in the UAE. It's something that ARH would have certainly done on a lower scale. They had a couple of horses once again who performed with great credit here over the winter, and I'd suggest that more people should probably look at doing the same.
I think it's you know, the UK is a wonderful nursery. We certainly have the advantage of having a good range of race courses and surfaces to get young horses going. And as you say, it's worked very well for ARH, as it did in the early years for Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum. And of course, trainers like Julian Smart in the Al Shahania years were also adept at bringing young horses on with a couple of UK runs before stepping up the tempo in races abroad. So as you say, let's hope that moving forward that's becomes a new focus for people, and they can use the UK as a nursery as well as being able to run older horses here in our group races.
Yeah, I mean, and let's face it, it's not much fun for a racehorse over here between the months of May and August or September. They're pretty much resigned to box rest for those 3 or 4 months, such as the heat. There's no paddocks, there's no grassy paddocks to turn out. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised that you know, 1 or 2 haven't. I know there's a cost involved quite clearly, but you know, it might be of benefit to send a few back. You know, a bit like Godolphin would do the other way. You know, they'd send thoroughbreds over here in years gone by to winter in the sun. Maybe time that 1 or 2 trainers in Dubai sent horses back to the UK to winter in the summer or to summer in the summer, and then, you know, set them up nicely for the winter over here.
Yeah, of course. Well, we've come to the end of the program now. That's it for today. We're hoping that throughout the course of the new season, we'll be able to get out a bit more and hopefully do a few proper stable visits and so on. But we'll just wind the program down with a few clips from the visits that I've done so far. And thank you for your time, Stephen, and look forward to speaking to you again after our first race.
Indeed, probably in about a week's time, our next race, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks very much, Stephen. Bye-bye.
No problem. Bye.